Sharp new warning of all-out war. For the first time, the mysterious and secretive nation has threatened a preemptive nuclear strike against the U.S.
The top man at the UN says North Korea is now on a collision course with the rest of the world.
And now to an extraordinarily brazen new threat from North Korea. This is quite a story, alerting its strategic rocket forces, which it says are assigned to strike American bases in Guam, Hawaii, and even the U.S. mainland. Let's go straight to our Pentagon correspondent, Chris Lawrence.
North Korea has been in the news a lot lately, having threatened the United States, South Korea, and Japan with nuclear weapons. The question is, why are they doing this? To answer these and other questions about North Korea, such as why they are so secretive and totalitarian, we'll first have to look at their history, which starts at the end of World War II. On August 9, 1945, Soviets arrived in North Korea with a few important Soviet officials. They attacked Japan on August 10th, then on August 15th, Japan surrendered. The Soviets agreed to a 3-year Korean trusteeship. Kim Il-sung arrived in North Korea on August 22nd after 26 years of exile in China and Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung then made the Korean People's Army, aligned with communists and made of guerrillas and former soldiers who fought in battles against Japan and China. He built a large army skilled in infiltration tactics and guerrilla warfare. Before the Korean War, Stalin gave the Korean People's Army tanks, trucks, artillery, and small arms. Kim Il-sung also made an air force. In 1948, originally all elections were to be sponsored by the United Nations. However, Kim Il-sung convinced the Soviets to not allow the United Nations in North Korea, and as a result, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was proclaimed on September 9th, and on October 12th, the Soviet Union declared Kim's regime the only lawful government in North Korea. And because of that, the Communist Party of Korea merged with the New People's Party, and that became the Workers' Party of North Korea. And then afterwards, the Workers' Party of North Korea and its southern counterpart became the Workers' Party of Korea, and Kim Il-sung was the chairman. By 1949, North Korea was a complete communist dictatorship, and all parties and mass organizations joined the Democratic Front for the reunification of the fatherland, or the Korean Peninsula. The government moved towards a Soviet Union-styled system and established a command economy, and then nationalized its productive assets. Before they did this, all of their assets were either owned by the Japanese or the Korean collaborators. After 1946, 70% of their assets were owned by the state. By 1949, 90%, and now, all of their assets. Because of Syngman Rhee's government and American military support in the South, reunification by Stalinist revolution was not going to happen. By early 1949, Kim Il-sung wanted to invade the South and reunify them by force, so he tried to get help from the Soviets and Chinese. By June 1949, most of the U.S. forces had left, and so the South was left with their weak and inexperienced army. However, the North Korean army was strong and experienced as well. They had a bunch of old Soviet equipment. Initially, Stalin rejected Kim's request for permission to invade the South, but after the communist victory in China and development of Soviet nuclear weapons, he reconsidered it. By January 1950, Stalin approved after Mao Zedong said he would send troops for support, and the Soviets provided minimal support. The Soviets provided minimal support with advisors and instructors who helped the North Korean plan the invasion. Stalin didn't want to fight the United States over Korea and wouldn't bring ground forces even in the case of a crisis. Before the North Korean tried to attack the southern government, both sides were fighting along the 38th parallel. And on June 25, 1950, the North Korean crossed the border in large numbers and attacked. Because it was so sudden, they took Seoul, and Syngman Rhee's government moved more south. North Korea almost won but failed to unify the peninsula when foreign powers entered the Civil War. They lost in September, and United Nations forces led by the US made them go back. By October, the United Nations had taken Seoul back and captured Pyongyang. Then China took Pyongyang and Seoul, and then the United Nations took Seoul back again. And after long negotiations, both sides made a border truce along the 38th parallel. After the war, an armistice was signed at Panmunjom on July 27, 1953. Although Kim Il-sung lost, he considered it a win because he was still in power. They celebrated the armistice with a military parade, and reconstruction of the DPRK started with Chinese and Soviet assistance. Pak Han-yong, party vice chairman and foreign master, was blamed for the loss and executed. Some of the South Korean leftists and communist sympathizers who defected to the North in 1945 to 1955 were also accused of espionage and other crimes and subsequently killed, imprisoned, or exiled to remote agriculture and mining villages. He had basically removed all of his potential political rivals. As well, afterwards, the North Koreans started to support de-Stalinization, which had started because of Nikita Khrushchev. In fact, while Il-sung went to go meet Nikita Khrushchev in August, his opponents tried to seize control of the government, but they failed. And then afterwards, the North Koreans sent out troops into the streets to stop protest for a reform. By 1961, Kim Il-sung no longer had any political opponents. He also had created an entire cult of personality. He had 30,000 in jails for reasons such as not printing his face on, well, good enough paper. He also lied about his whole entire guerrilla faction taking Korea from the Japanese without help from the Chinese. The Soviets told him to leave the whole cult of personality and work towards improving the lives of his people, which was actually bad at the time. Relations with Chinese became bad. In 1958, the last Chinese forces left. Mao Zedong criticized Kim for having an idiotic war and said he should be taken out of power. Kim stayed in power because the Soviets basically ignored the problem and paid attention to the Hungarian Revolution, which was happening at the time. Attempts at fixing the Chinese and North Korean relations had failed, and in October 1964, China had blown up their first nuclear weapons and refused to give any to North Korea. North Korea fell out of the Soviet Union after they had rejected a shopping list from Kim Il-sung and called them a Chinese puppet, and Kim said he wasn't anyone's puppet. North Korea had much more in common with Chinese though, and joined Mao Zedong in the super anti-American stance and rejecting de-Stalinization. Kim was concerned that Korea would be imperially ruled by China again and tried not to become too close with China. Khrushchev's fall was advantageous to the North Koreans because they could pull away from Chinese dominance. In 1972, talks between the South and North Korea happened, but nothing actually fixed the situation. The fall of South Vietnam, Kim felt it would help reunify the peninsula, so he tried to invade again, but he failed because China wouldn't help. The economy started to decline because of military expenditures and mining industry policies and international oil policies. Also, the anti-American stance made it harder for them to expand their foreign trade. Before the 1970s, their economy was rising and their living standards growing, but then it stopped and things got worse. Military expanded because of their decision to become less dependent on China. The government thought that they could pay for all those expenditures by borrowing foreign money and their mineral wealth. They invested heavily into their mining industry, and ironically it made the prices fall, leaving them with big debts and lowered their country's high level of social welfare. Their potential productivity had reached their limit, and they lagged behind in innovation and computer technologies as the rest of the world, including South Korea, progressed and marched forward. They stayed with mining and steel production. They had to decide between paying international loans or social welfare, and they chose to pay off their loans. In 1984, they started drifting towards the Soviet Union, but stopped in 1986 because their political system was too different at this point, and the Korean Workers' Party was subordinated by Kim Il-sung's personal dictatorship. As well, the Juche philosophy had replaced the Marxism-Leninism philosophy. As well, Kim Il-sung's personality cult was so massive and seen nowhere else. They also said that Marxism-Leninism was outdated and that Juche was better. Juche is the philosophy that was established by the North Korean government to rectify their decisions. It is a philosophy that promotes self-reliance and says that the Koreans, or North Koreans more specifically, are in charge of their country's success. After the Tiananmen Square massacre in China had a period of isolation which caused them to embrace Pyongyang. In 1988, China participated in the South Korean Olympics despite the North Korean boycott. And in 1990, China recognized both governments of the South and North equally. Then in 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union left North Korea without their main source of economic aid and left China as their only major ally, and their economy went into a free fall. Kim Il-sung died on July 8, 1994. Kim Jong-il, his son, succeeded him as the Secretary General of the Korean Workers' Party. The new constitution that was placed almost ended the wartime political system, but made the military rule legitimate by making the National Defense Commission, or the NDC, and they were the most important state organ, and the chairman is essentially the president, as they are the highest authority in the whole country. As well, Kim Il-sung was declared the eternal president of North Korea, although he is dead. Kim Jong-il was officially made the chairman on October 8, 1997, and he began reworking the political system towards his style. He introduced a new ideology called Song-gun, which literally translates to Army First, and it made the North Korean political system more like an actual military dictatorship, and as well the Korean Worker Party now controlled all policy. He didn't work to revive the old economic system which his father had created. Instead, factories and mines were shut down and basically no industry except for tourism and defense was allowed to stay. The personality cult and Juche remained, but the country became very different. No longer were lessons on Juche mandatory, and the country became quite popular amongst tourists as it's a very bizarre country. China was also quite different now, although they were their only ally still, and are their only ally. They were also became more dependent on international food aid. According to some statistics, 13 million people suffered from malnutrition in 2001. $300 million were provided in food aid from the United States, South Korea, Japan, the European Union, and the United Nations, as well a lot from China. However, North Korea is still super anti-American, South Korean, and Japanese. Heating and electricity outside of the state outside of the capital is actually quite non-existent, and food and medical is scarce. The population faces actual famine during bad harvests, and in 1997, people kept emigrating towards China, but it was illegal, and it is illegal, and anyone who is caught is deported back to North Korea and is either tortured, killed, or sent to a re-education camp. Kim Jong-il said the solution to this would be hard cash or developing information, technology, and foreign aid. However, barely any progress has been made on that. In 2002, he devalued the currency so that food prices could rise in order to stimulate the agriculture process production. He got rid of food rationing system and subsidized housing, and created the family unit farming system. Kim Dae-sung, the former president of South Korea, actively tried to stop the feud between the two with the Sunshine Policy. However, it didn't do anything. And in 2003, Amnesty International said, and I quote, "There were reports of severe repression of people involved in public and private religious activities, including imprisonment, torture, and executions. Unconfirmed reports suggested that torture and ill treatment were widespread in North Korean prisons and labor camps. Conditions were reportedly extremely harsh." However, on February 13th, 2007, North Korea signed an agreement with South Korea, the United States, Russia, China, and Japan, in which North Korea would shut down their Yongbyon nuclear reactor in exchange for economic and energy assistance. However, in 2009, the North continued to its nuclear test program. As well, in 2010, they sunk a South Korean Navy ship with a torpedo. On December 17th, 2011, Kim Jong-il died and was succeeded by Kim Jong-un. And recently he's been threatening the United States, South Korea, and Japan with nuclear weapons. So this is the end of the documentary. Hopefully you guys understand North Korea a little bit more, and hopefully you enjoyed this documentary. But in conclusion, North Korea hates the United States because they helped South Korea during the Korean War. Also, North Korea hates Japan because Japan used to rule Korea, and they hate South Korea because they wouldn't unify with them. So that's the end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Have a good afternoon.